welcome back to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone. I'm the Mid-High Director at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church, and I'm joined by Caitlin Dryke, who is the Communications Director.
Hi, Philip.
Hey, Caitlin. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm really excited for our conversation.
And today we are joined by Gary Peluso-Verdend, who is President Emeritus of Phillips Theological Seminary. And as you remember, he joined us a while back when we discussed when the church has split in the past and what has happened within the Methodist and United Methodist Church throughout its history. But today we have a very special conversation. First of all, hi Gary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
Today we have a very special conversation because a special holiday is coming up, the 4th of July, Independence Day. So we're going to talk about the difference between patriotism and nationalism and all the controversy that surrounds that. So, Gary, to start off, I want to ask you, should churches celebrate or mark the 4th of July?
Well, that's an interesting question, and because I might start and say I think it'd be difficult for most churches not to in some way mark the 4th of July. I think that the audiences in so many of our congregations, especially in the mainline congregations, given the age of them, expect some recognition of the 4th of July, whether that's at least the Battle Hymn of the Republic or another sort of patriotic song, minimally something there. But there's also that, there's a broader set of questions there about church and state and about religion and politics and about basically how affirming or how much affirmation or critique the church ought to be offering what's going on at a particular time in a government or a nation's life. So patriotism is certainly, being a patriot, I think, is a positive thing, and I think Christians can be patriots. Mm-hmm. But I think that the patriotism needs to be put in context then. Patriotism, when I was growing up, especially during the Vietnam War era, one side that was more of my parents' generation side was America, love it or leave it, and America was right because America did it, because we sort of set the standard as to what was right in the world. My generation didn't see it that way. We saw that America had committed more than one sin throughout our history. We made some mistakes. We made some rather large mistakes. So being a patriot, I was raised to believe that being a patriot meant that when your country was doing well and right, you celebrate it. And when your country was in the wrong, you point it out and you correct it. So if by celebrating 4th of July, if what is meant by that is you never critique America, and whatever you say is in the service has to be just rah-rah affirmation of where things are right now, I think that's wrong. That I don't think is a Christian stance. To say that I love my country and I want my country to do well and to be good, and that we're all better off when we're all better off, and the like, and to point out some of the gap between where things are now and where our values and our ideals are. Oftentimes those values and ideals being rooted in some sort of religious tradition, like loving your neighbor. Well, that seems appropriate to me. I like pointing out to folks that one of America's greatest theologians, and certainly during the 19th century, a greatest theologian was Abraham Lincoln. And when Lincoln talked about what America is, on the one hand, when he talked about American democracy, he said last best hope on earth, as compared to all the monarchies and autocracies in other parts of the world in the 19th century. On the other hand, he refused to call America the promised land. He called America God's almost chosen people. So there's humility in that. In his second inaugural address, besides besides other famous words. He says in there that if every drop of blood drawn with the lash needs to be paid for by a drop of blood drawn with the sword, who are we to say but the judgments of the Lord are true and right altogether? He said both sides pray to the same God and for God's will to be done, and God hasn't fully answered either. Again, it's the thinking of America within the context of God's providence without saying that America is God's chosen people and everything we do is right. That's good patriotism.
Something that I've struggled with, I grew up Catholic during kind of the George Bush post 9/11 era. And so the church that I grew up in and several of the churches that my family or friends were affiliated with had very specific prayers for our country.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those felt aggressively political, perhaps, to the point that it was you should vote for this candidate.
Mm-hmm.
This candidate is the only one with the Christian vision. And so for me, that created a deep discomfort. And I don't, how do we navigate that? How do we navigate as Christians the difference between what we are maybe morally obligated at and obligated as citizens to do versus overstepping into politics or denying nuance or choice in some of that political process?
Right. Well, first, let's acknowledge that separating church and state is different from separating religion and politics. Church and state are institutions, and the Constitution and the First Amendment does speak of that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that's there's no establishment of a church, but religion and politics are two realms of thinking that both include big narratives about what we're supposed to be. Both include an understanding of what it means to belong, and which includes, of course, who belongs and who doesn't. Both include a sense of a moral gap between is and ought, and both will speak of what it is that keeps us from being all that we can be, and what might empower us to get us further along. So I think it's like, it's said that spirituality and sexuality kind of travel in the same pathways in the body. Politics and religion travel on the same pathways in society. So there is going to be overlap between the two. I think one of the big differences between the way that religion tends to approach things and the way politics tends to approach things is that it's out of religion that we get these absolutes, that if you stand for this, then you can't be that. And where we talk about there being, orthodox and heretic and the like. And sometimes that language gets inappropriately moved from the realm of religion into the realm of politics, where politics is all about compromise. At least politics in a democratic society is. Religion tends to like things cleaner than politics, where you always have competing interests, and nobody and nothing is going to be exactly as you want them to be, because of the human nature of that kind of politics, where it's going to involve compromise and the like. Therefore, anytime religion attaches itself to a particular policy or a particular candidate, they are in some ways risking the integrity of the religion with it. I mean, you talked about during the W era and Catholic Church, and with abortion being one of the big issues there. If a candidate was pro-choice at all, that made them anti-life from some Catholic points of view, and therefore that one issue meant that you could not vote for that candidate, right? We're seeing something similar today, right? This time not from the Catholic Church, but from an extreme part of the evangelical Protestant church. And one of the most remarkable set of associations I've seen is between some Christian nationalists, and we can talk a little bit about what that is, some Christian nationalists who have affirmed Donald Trump as God's candidate. And they do this explicitly. This is not something I'm making up. They've tried to deal with, now how is this multiple divorce guy who's been accused of all kinds of sexual improprieties and seems to be giving dog whistles to neo-Nazis and alt-right and the like. So how is it that this guy is so embraced by part of the Christian evangelical world? Some of those leaders have had to do some really interesting mental gymnastics to try to get themselves into, well, why we're not talking about character anymore, as was the big deal during the Clinton years. Now we're talking about this guy who can, in rough and tumble, he'll get in there, he'll get the job done, regardless of what it takes, and this is what God wants at the present time. So they've gone to the Bible and they've said, well, he's like Cyrus the Persian, who was the king that, according to Isaiah, the Persian king that God appointed or anointed, in fact, to free the people from captivity in Babylon. So he's the foreigner who has freed us from our captivity, because a lot of the Christian right understood themselves to be in captivity during the Obama years. And now they've been released from that exile that they were in. And it's a long ways of talking about, the endorsement of a candidate or anything that comes close to endorsing a particular candidate or a particular point of view, I think risks the integrity of the faith.
So you mentioned Christian nationalists. What is that? Who are they? How did that come about? Give us a quick history lesson.
Sure. Christian nationalists believe that the United States is and always has been a Christian nation. That the Constitution was not founded as a secular constitution, despite the fact that it starts with "we the people" rather than "in the name of God, amen." And they believe that the founders of the United States were all Christians, which, if you go into the history of that, in particular, Thomas Jefferson was not. Fact is, Jefferson was pilloried by some of the religious leaders of his day for being too close to being a Unitarian.
Jefferson Bible.
Right, the Jefferson Bible, right, sitting in the White House and cutting out all of the priestcraft and superstition and papacy that he saw in the Bible and the like, and just leaving with the moral teachings of Jesus. Sure. So the Christian nationalists believe that the founders were Christians, that they meant to found a Christian republic, and that in fact Christianity is the basis of the republic. This has been a minority point of view throughout most of American history, but it creeps up every now and then. It got stronger for a period of time during the Civil War. Again, both sides praying to God, and each time there was a victory, they would declare a feast. And believe it or not, this happened even at the national level. Each time there was a major defeat, there was a fast declared. Can you imagine these days if Donald Trump called for a national fast? But it was a fast declared because they were trying to root out whatever unrighteousness it was that allowed for that defeat to happen. And there was it was North and South, but North in particular during the Civil War, they importuned Lincoln to put God in the Constitution. They said this was a mistake not to have put God in the Constitution. The last time that a constitutional amendment to put God in the Constitution was tried was actually in the post-World War II era. And it's still that same motivation that, Christianity is not just one of the historical features of this country, or it's not just that we're a nation of predominantly Christians. That's been less and less so, but rather than being a Christian nation, it's been fair to say we have been a nation of Christians. That's all insufficient for a Christian nationalist who says, no, God is the sovereign of the universe. God has appointed the United States of America to a special place in God's sovereign plan for how the world is to work. And we elect Christian leaders who believe that, and Christian laws, and that's what we ought to do. If anybody's watching The Handmaid's Tale, Gilead, the way that that's being portrayed, is what Christian nationalists want. In the episode that just played, that just dropped this last Wednesday, when you see the Washington Monument, there's been a crossbar in Gilead added to the monument. So it's no longer the Washington Monument, it's a huge cross on the wall. That's the kind of stuff that Christian nationalists want to see.
Do we see any patterns to like when it flares up in national discourse, when we see a peak of Christian nationalists? You mentioned Civil War, you mentioned post-World War II. Are there historical patterns or linkages there around division or anything else?
Sure, I think there probably are, and it probably has to do with threat. When we feel under threat, this kind of maneuvering gets pulled to the fore. Sociologist I know talks about one of the features of fundamentalism in the modern world, whether it's Christian fundamentalism or Hindu fundamentalism or Islamic fundamentalism, Jewish fundamentalism. There are different kinds of fundamentalism that they're all called forth by some threats to patriarchy, for instance, to the rule of men at the top of society. So it's an identity threat. Mm-hmm. In Civil War, it was clearly an identity threat, right? About what kind of nation is this going to be, and to whom is the franchise extended. Post-World War II, the big identity threat there was the Soviet Union, mm-hmm. And the communist bloc of countries. And we need to say how we differ from the communist world and how our way of doing everything is superior. And so you have this alignment between capitalism, religion, which is when the Judeo-Christian tradition, so-called, gets really invented, but it's really Christianity. Capitalism, Christianity, and free enterprise, choice, that gets kind of wrapped together with liberty and freedom. And this is what it means to be an American, whereas communists are godless, they're secular, they don't believe in free enterprise, they don't believe in choice, and democracy goes with all that first set of things, and not at all with the second set of things.
So for many people in politics and whatnot, it's how they care. They want to show how much they're Christian and how much the other person is not a Christian on a nationalistic level, because it's we're Christian, so we're the good people, and they're not a Christian. Don't vote for them. This is what they believe, which kind of gets into the abortion and pro-choice against pro-life and all that argument is we're Christians, they're not. Right.
And Philip, I'm curious to see how long this is going to be able to play out, because this is so generational in a way. Yeah, folks of my parents' generation, World War II generation, this is what they were raised on. Everybody who grew up after them were raised somewhat in a somewhat different era, and now with less than 50% of the country being Protestant, with more than 30% of the millennial generation declaring allegiance to no religious tradition, with there being so many more different kinds of religious expression, so much and so many fewer incentives to be a institutional church person. Mm-hmm. I just really wonder how long this business about Christianity, democracy, America will keep playing out.
Makes sense.
Do you think that the linkings are part of the devolving? So I'm thinking again back to that, post 9/11. I'm of that generation. I'm of the none and done millennial generation. It's not only are you questioning these religious institutions, but you're seeing unjust wars declared by the country. So it's almost like by packaging them together, when one devolves, it all devolves, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. In fact, there are a lot of evangelical leaders who they're in the never Trump camp, and they have distanced themselves from Franklin Graham and Paula White, Jerry Falwell, the current president of Liberty University, and the like, who have all been the Trump supporters. And there are numerous evangelical leaders I know in seminary education, for instance, who have said that basically the Christianity has prostituted itself to being near to those in power, to affirming things that Christianity has no right affirming, and have been highly, highly critical of the way that Christianity has been so closely connected with rejection of the of normality for LGBTQ persons, and rejected marriage equality and the like. These evangelical leaders have been saying, no, Christianity ought to be so much more about poverty and reducing poverty and mass incarceration and addressing racism and the like. And this is more of where the religion of Jesus needs to move.
Feeding the homeless, welcoming the stranger into your country.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I think to your point, Philip, I think a lot of Christians, and I think just a lot of people right now are in this very uncomfortable place with the 4th of July right around the corner, but also seeing really heavily spotlighted in the media what would be interpreted as human rights violations in terms of our response on the border and how immigrant and refugee children are being treated. And so I think there's a lot of discomfort right now as Christians with, and just as people with what's going on in the country. So how do we navigate that? How do we tread about that?
The only way I can try to address that, and I'm affirming what you're saying, Caitlin. I mean, this is a very dark time for the country, I think, and seeing what's going on at the border in particular, regardless of where you stand on immigration, the human rights, the humanity of this is just deeply troubling, and the like. So I think what we can do is, 4th of July is a good time to ask the question, what does America stand for? And what should we as people of faith contribute to making that be? And I do think there are some outstanding values that our country stands for, which are true as far as they're great values. They're not values we have done a great job always in incarnating. So that's part of the, how we talk about what's the work left to be done. And I think there are tremendous resources within nearly all faith traditions in regard to justice and compassion and human dignity. And 4th of July is not a time to put our head in the sand about any of the violations thereof, but it's to call forth our better selves. What I would guess is, as I've done a lot of reading in American history over the last year on sabbatical, and I'm more and more convinced that there have always been two Americas. There have always, and you can talk about that in rich and poor or whatever, but what I'm talking about is there's always been an America with these tremendous ideals of freedom and liberty for all, the pursuit of happiness for all. And the pursuit of happiness, by the way, is more of a common good than it is about every individual doing their own thing, regardless of how that works with anybody else around them. There's always been those wonderful values, and there's always at the same time there has been whose backs were some people standing on in order to get themselves ahead and keep somebody else behind. So the age-old oppression of one human being or one group of human beings by another has also been part of the American story. And it's been, unfortunately, I'm speaking as a white person now, it's been a part of the white American story throughout all of our history. And there have been, again, great ideals come forth, and then these practices which oppresses some group in order for me and my group to move ahead. So there's always going to be something on the 4th of July or any other day of the year for religion to call attention to say, this is not our better self. We could do better than this.
Which is sometimes hard for people to admit, because you're so much into the rah-rah, America is the greatest, that it's hard to admit that we can do better for some people.
Right. And where I feel for preachers these days is this requires some nuance. I mean, this kind of conversation requires some nuance, and most people, unfortunately, are now conditioned not to be able to respond to nuance. So to say, yes, I love America, I also have my critiques. That requires, you got to stay with me a little while, rather than I'm for or against and the like. I mean, I could say, I think about the sports players, Colin Kaepernick being one of them, the taking the knee. There's such a long history in this country of protest and taking a knee, including coming from religion. The fact is, I'd like to see, there are a few congregations you could pull this off, where the sermon is take a knee on 4th of July. And that being an appropriate act of patriotism. And from a Christian point of view, it is. I like to say that the most radical thing we say every single Sunday in church is, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Because there's another kingdom here. And we live in the greatest empire on the face of the earth right now. So to say that God's will, to ask for God's will to come is to put it in conflict with the kingdoms of this world, including our own at times.
A real sticking point in many churches is the U.S. flag.
Yep.
It's controversial about where it goes in the sanctuary. If it gets taken out, there's a big hullabaloo about it.
Right.
Should churches fly a U.S. flag in the sanctuary?
Okay, I'm going to give you the short answer. My short answer is no, I don't think so. The longer answer is this is a practical matter. How much capital is going to cost a pastor to remove it, or how much time and depending on the congregation's polity, how much time and energy you're going to put into this particular issue. With everything else you have going on, do you want to put the time and energy into this? There was a point in time, especially during the Vietnam War era, where sometimes pastor would do the prophetic thing, quote unquote, and just take the flag out, usually himself at that point. Were very few female pastors at that point. I think most polities would say that's not the pastor's decision to make by him or herself, or the pastoral staff by themselves. So who are you going to work with? What's the process you're going to go through that's fair and transparent and like all the things you want it to be. But when come around to what I said originally, should they be in the that be in the sanctuary? Not really. It's not a Christian symbol. I think the sanctuary is of all places in the church, the sanctuary is a place where Christians gather to do Christian things. And kneeling before the cross, yes. Kneeling before the flag, no.
I remember when I was in high school, The flag was in the sanctuary, and it got moved like 5 inches, 6 inches. So someone got upset, and so they would move it back. And it was two groups of people who they wanted the flag to be in the sanctuary, but because it was moved 5, 6 inches,
Right.
they were having a battle with each other, but they didn't know who they were having the battle with, and it just kept getting moved because it needed to be in the same spot every week where it had been or where they thought it should be.
Right, right. And the flag, the value in a flag, of course, is what it stands for. So removing the flag, even though I might have all the best theological reasons for why it ought to be removed, because it's such a pastoral matter, and again, it's going to take so much energy to do it. You have to, in the list priority of things of what is most important for the witness of this congregation or witness any congregation to be done,
What do you want
we're going to put it.
What do you want to spend your time doing?
You can always have a fight. What do you want to fight over today?
One of the big parts about the 4th of July Sunday is the music. As far as my history, I've never been comfortable singing patriotic songs in services, especially about how great America is. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that. One song I do love singing that I would sing any 4th of July service is "This Is My Song,"
right?
Which you might have were going to mention. I just wanted to read a few of the lyrics to that. "This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine." And for me, that culminates we have high hopes. Our country's great. Our skies are blue. It mentions in another verse how blue our skies are. But other countries, their people love their country just as much as we love ours. And like that's, to me, a good 4th of July Sunday song, hymn. And I was wondering what your thoughts were about particular hymns in the worship service.
Yeah, "This Is My Song" is when I was in the parish. That's and I had a 4th of July. That's exactly one of the songs I wanted to have for the very reason you're pointing out, is that apparently being patriotic or being affirming your nation is it's in the human heart to do so, and that does a great job of saying it's in my heart and it's in other hearts also. So I think that is an excellent one. I'm not, the names aren't coming to mind right now, but there are stanzas of some of these hymns which aren't in our hymnal that maybe should be, because it gets a little more complicated. It complicates the story some, in other words. As I recently I read again. I mean, it's not a hymn, even though probably somebody has put it to music. But Emma Lazarus's full poem, the portion of which is on the Statue of Liberty about "Give me you're tired and you're poor." I mean, read that whole. I mean, that's a national. That kind of has the status of a national hymn. Read that whole thing in church on Sunday. It's fabulous, and there's no way it wouldn't come across as a bitter critique of what we see going on in the country today. So that's one example. I just got a book that's just been published that John Meacham and Tim McGraw have done together. And Meacham is an American historian, and McGraw, is a country music singer. And it's songs of protest, songs of protest, songs of hope, something like that. But it's American songs that are of both kinds. And so I might want to go to a book like that and make some strategic choices out of it. So besides the Battle Hymn of the Republic and maybe "This Is My Song" and the like, there are some other pieces out there that might be useful.
Do you have any closing thoughts about this topic?
I think this is one of the great things, one of the great issues that we Christians today need to sort out. Since at least the last, going on nearly 40 years, the language and the public perception in this country has been dominated, as to what Christianity is, has been dominated by the Christian right. And the Christian right has made an alliance with the conservative kind of politics that, as the contradictions of those politics are becoming more and more evident, so is even disdain for that kind of Christianity. And I think that those of us who affirm a different way of following the way of Jesus than what we've seen presented on our behalf in some ways in public, need to do more in public, including in our worship and study experiences, for how to be both a Christian and a patriot in ways that first honor what Jesus was about, and secondly, help America be the kind of just and compassionate country that a lot of us would like to see it become.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast, joined by Gary Peluso-Verdend, and co-hosted by Philip Boone and Caitlin Dryke. We are located at 1301 South Boston, and we will try to get an episode out fairly regularly. With me being a youth director, I'm very busy in the summer, and as you can tell, kind of still have a camp voice going on. So we will attempt to get it semi-regularly throughout the summer. But thank you so much for joining us, and please come to our Facebook page to see what's going on at Boston Avenue. Thank you.